and presentation following our AGM, and may I welcome and introduce His Honour Jamie Tabor. Many of us will know Jamie as the resident judge at the Gloucester Crown Court, a position which he retired in 2018 after some 15 years in charge, during which time I understand it was the busiest, one of the busiest, if not the busiest court centre in the country. Since retiring, Jamie has continued to serve the county, not least as chair of the Gloucestershire Community Foundation. And it's in that capacity that we will hear from him tonight, speaking on a title for Gloucestershire, for all of Gloucestershire. In doing so, he's joined by Talitha Nelson, the Chief Executive Officer of the GCF. And it's a pleasure to welcome you both, Jamie and Talitha, to our meeting tonight. We are working together as organisations, and I hope we will do very much more of that. But that, I think, is something you're going to discuss with us tonight. We look forward very much indeed to hearing what you have to say. And so without further ado, Jamie, I think, are you up first? It's over to you.
Sir Henry, Warden, fellow members, good evening. You would have thought after 45 years in the law that I would have read my brief properly, but I failed to do so because when I read Phil's injunction for me to make a speech, he said I was to entertain. I hadn't realised until this evening that I had to entertain, so I apologise. But before I do anything else, I'm going to tell you a joke that's got nothing to do with the Community Foundation and is entirely clean. A horse and a donkey met in the pub and were sharing a pint together. They'd not met before. And the donkey said to the horse, he said, "What you been doing?" And the horse said, "Well," he said, "I've had rather a good year. I went down to Epsom and I won the Derby. And then I flew over to Paris and I won the Arc de Triomphe. And they're thinking of running me in the Grand National," said the donkey. And he said to the donkey, "What do you do?" And the donkey said, "I take little children for rides down on the beach." "Let's meet up," said the donkey. And so they arranged to meet at the donkey's house the following Thursday. Whilst he was walking back from the pub, he noticed a shop was open and he bought a picture of a zebra. Sure enough, the following Thursday, the thoroughbred arrived at his horse, all full of himself and the like. And he walked in and he saw above the fire this picture of the zebra. And he said, "Hey, what's that?" And the donkey said, "Oh, that's when I played for Juventus and scored 3 goals in the European Cup final." Sadly, I feel like a rugby player who's just scored a try or not. And you can't tell whether you thought that was funny, but it's very clean and I enjoyed it. I've identified no less than 5 past or present members, trustees in the congregation. So I know I'm going to have to watch my step very carefully so I don't tread on toes. I have given this talk once before at Cirencester University when I talked about the state of the judicial system at that time and the legal system. I was amazed and very grateful because I was hugely indiscreet by warning all members that Mr. Grayling was going to do undue damage to the criminal justice system and to the probation service in particular, which he duly did. If it had got out to the press, I would have been sacked. But honourable members, thank you very much. None of you went and sneaked. So to community foundations. Oh, incidentally, my wife's uncle was the first man to receive an MC at Imgin Hill. And whenever we saw him thereafter, he never talked about Imgin Hill, but had a hatred of food waste. And if so much as a single grain of waste was left on a plate, he got very, very strange indeed. He spent whatever it was, years in captivity, and it was worse than the Japanese. So what about community foundations? A short history, but the more interesting part, frankly, will come from Talitha. We have an American to thank for the idea of community foundations. A banker by the name of Frederick Goff had the foresight to realize that needs would change as times passed, and that an endowment to a foundation was a straightforward way for individuals to have a charitable legacy in perpetuity. He was actually financially on a par with Rockefeller and Carnegie, but retained a much lower profile. Community foundations started in the American banking world and soon expanded all over America. There are now over 1,800 communities worldwide, from Astrakhan to New Zealand, and would you believe it or not, in Russia. All have a simple motto: local giving for local need. Foundations have got very big. For instance, in America, the Cleveland Foundation holds $2.5 billion in endowment and has distributed 1.78 billion in charitable grants since its inception over 100 years ago. That'll take some beating, and I'm afraid GCF is never going to get there. The phrase local giving for local need is at the essence of all community foundations worldwide and is at the heart of what GCF is about. Great Britain was quite slow to react, and the first community foundation was not established until 1975 in Wiltshire, but they quickly spread throughout the United Kingdom. There are now 46. Presently, UK community foundations are managing over £692 million in endowments and working with over 15,000 donors. By December 2017, community foundations had distributed over £1 billion since inception. In 2017-2018 alone, 98 million was granted to charities and communities, and the same the following year. During 2020, this year, the figures will be far higher, probably almost double. UKCF is not a grant-making organisation, but the umbrella organisation to which almost all local community foundations are attached. There are a number of benefits for GCF in being a member of this network. First of all, UKCF is based in London and has the air of government and senior ministers, and it really does. Whether or not they listen or not is a completely different matter. It helps with the ideas and development and training for both the executive and the board of community foundations. It runs a stringent quality assurance program that ensures foundations are properly governed and managed. It's not unlike the dreaded Ofsted. And sadly, there is a new program just about to start. Helen Lovett, take note. We share best practice with other community foundations, which is helpful. And we gather a nationwide picture of what's going on all over the country. Well, where does GCF fit into the picture? It was incorporated in 1989. It was a very small organisation to begin with, and it only really began to grow 10 years later. And at that time, Henry was president, and Joanna Trollope was a patron. And in 1998, according to the records, she made a speech at a dinner that, quotes, galvanised philanthropy across the county. A list of trustees then and later reads like a Gloucestershire who's who. One anonymous donor gave £321,000 in 2001. The Hitchins family gave £250,000 soon afterwards, challenging GCF to match that fund. And these donations really got GCF going, and ultimately the Hitchinses gave £1 million. Part of the annual GCF audit report read at that time, the generosity of the Hitchins to Gloucester and to charities and groups striving to eliminate disadvantage in the county is enormously welcome. In 2007, as you'll remember, the year of the Great Flood, 581,000 was awarded by way of grants, a figure that was by far the largest ever made by GCF until this year. And it reflects local needs being met by local people. By 2008, the foundation had 2.6 million by way of endowment, but little by way of flow through, i.e. income coming in and going out in the same year. Slowly but surely, other philanthropists and organisations made endowments encouraged by the board and the chairman of the board at the time. The endowment grew, prompted by more generosity and the considerable rise in the stock market. We all remember 2008 and what happened then. With the increase came a commensurate higher level of grant making. In 2014, the board entered into a service level agreement with Quartet, the Bristol-based and much larger community foundation. This was done for a variety of good reasons, but principally to save costs so that more money could be used for grant making. It also meant that GCF had an excellent source of advice on governance and general strategy. Thus, GCF had a solid base from which to work. The disadvantage was that grant making was assessed in Bristol. It was done very efficiently, but assessments were carried out outside the county, although GCF trustees met on grants panel in Gloucestershire. Whilst the decision to move to Quartet was undoubtedly the right one, last year I encouraged the board to take another look at the business model. GCF was now on a sound footing, but was effectively based outside the county and could only afford to have one part-time employee type manager operating in the county. In the summer of 2019, the board made a decision that we would bring GCF back into the county. We would not renew the SLA, which we had with Quartet, and we would employ our own staff. Quartet themselves agreed with this course, and in fact, it was very much with their blessing. As you might imagine, in the words of Alex Ferguson, this was a squeaky bum moment. The board's aim was to keep overheads as low as possible and to have far greater local presence. We decided to employ a full-time CEO who had to live within the county and set aside funds for a part-time local grants manager, again, someone who had to live within the county. We decided not to have an office. We were ahead of our time as far as that was concerned, but we knew we could rely on the generosity of the Hitchenses if we needed an office. Indeed, one of our trustees and members of the Honourable Company, Mark Hayward, also provided warm facilities. And ever and as always, we were welcome at Hynham. An interviewing panel was appointed to assess candidates for the full-time role. They recommended Talitha out of nearly 30 candidates. If the previous decision had been squeaky, this was a squeaky super squeaky bum moment, because she had no experience whatsoever of the charitable sector. But the board could see that she had in-depth management experience at a high level in business, huge energy, modern attitudes towards communications and marketing, and was generally very dynamic. By the beginning of 2020, she'd already gained considerable experience in the local charitable sector, and we had also appointed a highly efficient and indeed much liked by the charitable sector grants manager. And then COVID hit us. Talitha and the grants manager had within days reacted swiftly and efficiently. They set up an emergency fund. We were well ahead of almost all other community foundations and the first funders in Gloucestershire to respond to the problem. We have now raised in that 1 year or less, £1 million for the COVID fund, and we're able to meet a threefold increase in grant making with only these two members of staff and some valuable assistance from a lady who'd been furloughed and members of the board. You may remember, has just been said, that the Honourable Company themselves very generously, and I think sensibly, donated £10,000, which was distributed rapidly to deserving causes. This year alone, with our other grants programmes, which we have managed to continue, including main grants, High Sheriff and the Freemasons, we are projected to award 1.2 million by way of grants. That's between 3 and 4 times our previous total. Grants have been made to diverse and fascinating organisations. For instance, we've supported emergency basic human needs such as food and shelter. A lot of people, even in 21st century Gloucestershire, still go hungry. It's really shaming. Grants have ranged from helping breastfeeding mothers to providing bicycle for NHS staff to get to work, fuel for emergency motorcycles delivering medicine, to Men in Sheds, one of my favourite, I have to say, not a charity, but just a little community. Many grants have been made for child counselling, much needed, and to support for senior citizens who are frail and or lonely. We've given to local shops and to a Leonard Cheshire home situated in Gloucestershire. We don't normally support national charities, but at the height of the pandemic, they were absolutely desperate for PPE and didn't know where to get the money from. Each application has to be assessed very carefully and checks are made with the Charity Commission. We have had fraudulent applications, inevitably. Finally, assessments are written for the panel, and then the panel meets via Zoom, and indeed there's a panel meeting tomorrow. And the rules for us all, whether it be employees or fund holders or members of the public, are the sort of messages that you have read in the annual general meeting report. We've had tremendous assistance and lovely messages from people who say, for instance, I would be without a home if it hadn't been for this grant. And that's what we should be doing. I'm proud of what GCF has achieved in the last 12 months. The work that GCF has carried out was cited by UKCF as the gold standard for efficient and swift grant making, something of which I'm particularly proud. I'm confident we have an excellent CEO and an excellent model to carry on our essential work of identifying local need and matching up local giving. However, and this is really important, we do go far beyond grant making. GCF was one of the founders of what's called Gloucestershire Funders. This is the first time that a group of funders have worked together in Gloucestershire, and Talitha will tell you more about it. We are taking a major role in community leadership, which is one of our principal strategic aims. Talitha will tell you shortly about what has just been agreed and signed off last Thursday, I think, between the Honourable Company, Cranfield Trust and GCF. And members of the Honourable Company can feel very proud of this particular project. I think it's going to be very successful and very important. Meanwhile, we've increased our staff from 2 to 3, 1 full-time and 2 part-time. Our grant manager remains on 3 days a week, but we now have a lady called a projects officer who also helps with the administrative work, which is burdensome. If you can imagine doling out hundreds of thousands of pounds to hundreds of charities, the paperwork is absolutely staggering. I should first also add that we use a member of Quartet still 1 day a week to manage our finances. Inevitably, with what's little more than skeleton staff, all trustees have to undertake considerably more work than perhaps the ordinary member of a charity board would expect. We have an excellent board and all members are engaged heavily. We have a broad range of talents, banking world and importantly, the charity world, as well as business. We do need to increase our diversity, but not at the expense of ability and certainly avoiding woke behaviour. GCF continues to keep a very stringent eye on its costs. We're currently carrying out serious research into the charitable sector and local communities in Gloucestershire. The fruits of this will be available within a few weeks. I think Talitha will be able to tell you a little bit about what we've seen so far. This will provide us with detailed first-hand knowledge of what is required and, more importantly, what is going to be required in the near future. More importantly still, both executive and the board have acquired real and substantial knowledge of the charitable sector in Gloucestershire and its strengths and its weaknesses, and this knowledge increases every day. The future looks pretty grim. Some of the wisest charity CEOs believe it will start to get very bad by the spring of next year. It may be even earlier than that. These forecasts were made incidentally before the present lockdown was announced or furlough extended, and certainly obviously before the news of the vaccine was pronounced. I don't think that's going to help in the short term, and it's the short term that we're going to need to look at very carefully. GCF will be busier than ever, provided the money continues to come in. I've written thank you letters to people who, bless them, have sent £10 and to others who've donated 100,000. I'm unashamedly asked not only honourable members of the honourable company members present, but all members to look under their beds to see what's squirreled away. But I'm not just talking about money, but also life skills as well, which will be required to help other charities, many of whom do not have expert business skills or indeed management skills of a high level, particularly the little ones. And indeed some communities that aren't charities at all. We're certainly going to strive this year, or next year now, I suppose, to reach the really small little communities which do not have people promoting them because they don't know how to. So that's what we're about, that's where we came from and that's where we're going to. But Talitha will give you a far better up-to-date talk now about what's going on. I will mute myself.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to the Honourable Company and the Honourable Company members for inviting me today. It's lovely to see some familiar faces, past and present trustees and others that I've met in my year in post. And for those who haven't met me yet, I've been in post since August, as Jamie has mentioned. I've been here a year. I've got an awful lot to learn, but it's been a huge year. Obviously, COVID wasn't on the cards when we started looking at our work in January, but COVID has actually presented some real challenges for everybody, but some incredible opportunities and silver linings. And I think that's where we can have a discussion about how we work together with those silver linings and the opportunities that present for partnership working, and how we look at the future. So essentially, the for Gloucestershire, for all for Gloucestershire, I think looking at our county, we always talked about partnership working and collaboration. We always talked about it's better to work together than in silo. And I guess it's now more than ever, it's so crucial for communities, sectors to start working together better, because what we haven't got is probably having gone through COVID, that learning process of thinking about the future. If we go through further challenges, if we go through another crisis, will our sector survive? Will charities survive? So what is the work we need to put in now? What is the work we need to do now in order to grow the roots of our county, grow the stability of our county, so we can face future challenges? So in the short term, as Jamie's mentioned, we delivered very quickly in the last 6 months. We looked at COVID in March. We reacted quickly. We were part of a network which we could look at how other community foundations that were well established in dealing with crisis, we could look at what was going on and we could adapt very quickly. We're a small organisation. We've delivered about 800,000, as Jamie's mentioned, to 140 charities in the last 6 months. And there was a process of panic, of adapting to that panic. So we were listening to what charities were talking to us about. They were picking up the phone. They were panicking about what to do, where to turn, how they should adapt, what are the opportunities to adapt. And we grew a very quick picture, week by week, month by month, what we were being asked for. Obviously, funding was crucial and funding is still going to be crucial. But what are the other areas and what are the other skills and support we need to bring to the county other than money? So where we looked at funding in the short term, obviously we're at a point now, it almost feels like the calm after the storm before the next storm. Applications started to decline, and we started to have a chance to take a breath and discuss what does the future look like. We needed the opportunity in terms of our capacity to take on the ground learning, take our conversations and the information we had gathered where themes had started to emerge in terms of the support that was needed, but we really needed a much deeper dive, and that's where our research comes in. So in terms of research, we've done lots of desk-based research, but as Jamie mentions, we've surveyed and we've surveyed 100 charities, and we've asked them what is their journey through COVID and what are the experiences, what have been the challenges, but what have been the opportunities, and what do they think the future looks like, and what support do they think they need to survive. So what has been very interesting, having done the research, and as Jamie mentioned, some early signs started to come through in terms of feedback. I'll share a couple of the snapshots with you. It's been fascinating for us to see, and certainly some of the answers haven't been what we expected. So the main question, I think, is probably around what the concerns of charities are. What are their main concerns? And actually mental health comes out as number one, isolation comes out as number two, and unemployment comes out as number three. And this was out of reliance on food banks, housing and homelessness, family breakdown, domestic abuse, bereavement support, and substance abuse. So actually poor mental health is our biggest concern. And I think as we read what's going on in the press, mental health it doesn't discriminate by age, by background, by sector. So this is going to be our overarching focus in terms of poor mental health. So anyone who is supporting in areas of mental health is the sort of overarching piece that comes into, I guess, our county in Gloucestershire. Isolation and loneliness has been one of those elements that we all are very aware of, and actually isolation again is number two in terms of concern. And through lockdown and through the second lockdown, the impacts of isolation. And third, unemployment. We are highly reliant in this county, as a report has recently come through, which was very surprising. We're one of 9 counties in the country that has been cited as most vulnerable economically to the impacts of COVID. I was pretty shocked to see Gloucestershire on that report, and it was due to its high reliance on tourism and the events sector. And actually, when we look at our rural communities along with our towns, the opportunities for young people for work, the opportunities when you're in a rural community are quite low. And actually the event sector is a huge sector that goes probably unnoticed, as they don't have shop fronts. So we have a lot of challenges in the county in terms of how do we support, as we talked about, the whole of Gloucestershire. There were some really interesting answers around the potential support that organisations need to thrive, as well as some real positives in terms of the opportunities COVID has presented. So in terms of opportunities, what's been interesting in terms of answers, now is the perfect time to think about how to offer our services in a new way. That was the highest response at 80%. And actually through COVID, I guess vital funding has enabled the lights to stay on and the staff to be paid. But actually it's also an opportunity to think about how services are offered. And certainly, as we all know, technology has been one of the ways of adapting to keeping in touch with beneficiaries and people that they're communicating with. But there's a lot more to do around this piece of work. Secondly, there's a wider awareness of issues faced by our beneficiaries. So through COVID, charities have felt they have become more in touch with a lot of their beneficiaries. They've started to get a deeper understanding and connection with their beneficiaries. So that's been quite surprising, as we think maybe face-to-face has removed some of that opportunity. But actually, this has been an opportunity to get to know beneficiaries and some of the issues that they face. There's also there's an increase in community spirit. Number 3, I think now more than ever, our communities are engaged. We must keep that momentum up. And so community spirit across sectors throughout our county has been at an all-time high. Improved technology means charities have been able to support more efficiently. So where maybe these sorts of technological advances may not have been picked up in the past and may not have been seen to be beneficial, have certainly become extremely beneficial now with technology. But that doesn't mean to say there's a number of beneficiaries and charities that aren't able to adapt to technology, and they're the challenges we have in terms of supporting those organisations. Our trustees and directors are more willing for our organisations to try new things. So maybe this is our chance to innovate. Maybe this is our chance to think about how we can work better together, maybe work differently. And some of the rules all books that we've written in the past. Maybe there's some new learnings and some new ways of working, which is what I'll go on to in terms of how we're looking to work together in our new partnership. What's very interesting on the last point I wanted to bring up in terms of potential support. So we asked the question, what could we do to support you other than money? So where are the other areas in your organisation that you need support in? And that was what was really interesting to us and has definitely formed part of the driving force behind our partnership. So a couple of the things that come out that were absolutely really interesting. So really interesting. So number one, I guess charities in the past have maybe not necessarily collaborated together. There's been a culture of maybe more competition over collaboration in terms of funding. There is so limited pots of money out there that charities were all trying to access pots of money, which created more competition than collaboration. But what has been fascinating over the last 6 months, that the number one thing that charities have said that they would like and need more than ever is help in forming partnerships and collaborations with other organisations. Now that has been quite a seismic change in terms of going from competition over collaboration back to collaboration over competition. And I think that's where we have an enormous opportunity in this county to work better together. And there's a real appetite now, and we've gone from, you know, maybe being concerned who's getting what money to actually concerned about who needs support and help. So I think that's been really enlightening for us. Secondly, it goes on to practical skills, marketing advice, including social media. You know, while we're all moving into a technological phase of how we're operating, you know, where have those organisations got the skills? We were lucky enough, you know, we may be a small team, but it was about skills. You know, our background, you know, in communication, social media, PR meant that we were able to mobilise some great content, mobilise some great PR and activity around promotion. And not all organisations have that skill and background. So that is some of the support they're asking for. And maybe there's some work to be done in terms of supporting those organisations to help fundraise, promote themselves better, and embrace some of the modern technologies. Other areas, they need help in resilience planning, so they're able to bounce back better. So I think some of the conversations with charity leaders were, we're feeling really lonely and isolated. This is really tough. One CEO I spoke to in the first week of lockdown, who's very experienced, hugely capable, said, Talitha, this has been the toughest week of my whole career. And this is where it's been really tough for our organisations to think day to day how to adapt, day to day how to support their beneficiaries. But then it's suddenly now, what does the future look like? I'm not really sure how I should be planning forward. I'm not really sure, you know, what the next 1 to 3 years looks like. So this is where these organisations are starting to need that support. And it might be they're small, that they don't necessarily have large boards, or maybe not even a board, they might be a CIC. So there's a real piece of work around supporting forward planning. The other side was mentoring for our charity leaders, and that came in at in 4th place. So essentially, the sampling of this research was brilliant. It was really varied, and there's only a percentage of charity leaders that would have answered this, but actually out of 120 have said mentoring would be really important for them to be able to move their organisations forward and have a chance of being able to survive in the long run. So this research has been vital in distilling our general day-to-day picture of our county and helping us really start thinking about the next 6 to 12 months, but along the 1 to 3 year planning, where nobody quite knows the future, but we've got to start building some resilience into our county. We've supported in the short term, we've supported funding in the short term, but now we need to start thinking about our resilience planning. So this is where our partnership comes into play, and this is an incredibly exciting piece of work that I'm delighted to share with you. Initially, I came in last August, but some of this work had already happened previous to me coming on board. Helen Lovett started the conversation with the Cranfield Trust, and Andrew Tabor came into that process, and that conversation started around mentoring charity leaders. When I came on board, I was then asked to find those charities and put those charities forward, and Andrew Tabor went away and found the Honourable Company members to become mentors. So we set up a pilot scheme for 12 months, and so essentially that programme ran for 12 months. Those partnerships were set up, the mentors and mentees, and we've now completed that 12 months. And that pilot scheme was hugely successful. And even though we were thinking about supporting charity leaders in order to support the VCS in strength and growth, actually COVID hit, and now more than ever this is going to be needed. So we'd started to put the foundations on, and now we're starting to look at that formal plan. So we went away with the Cranfield Trust and looked at what would a formal partnership look like, and what would the year of work look like. So essentially we want to set up each year 10 charity leaders and 10 mentors to be put together, and over a 5-year plan we will come out the other end with 50 mentors and 50 mentees. It's an enormous legacy piece of work, because this is about the impact of strengthening our charities, and the level of people development doesn't go on in the charity sector as it does the business sector. So the formal plan, where the Honourable Company, Gloucestershire Community Foundation and the Cranfield Trust have formed a partnership to deliver a 12-month programme. The extra bits we've brought onto this programme probably sets us apart from any other programmes that have happened. Community foundations have partnered with the Cranfield Trust before, and the Cranfield Trust partners with a number of organisations across the country. But this is a unique programme. What we've brought together is another piece of work around peer-to-peer development and mentor-to-mentor connection and develop. So through that 12-month period, there'll be an opportunity for those two cohorts to learn and develop together, and that's really exciting. So some of the research that's come up from charity leaders in our county is the opportunities for charity leaders to meet others, to connect with others in their county, other charity leaders they can talk to, widen their network of support. So this is really exciting. On top of this, the Cranfield Trust will support up to another 20 charities with ad hoc support that's needed. If we have a charity come to us in distress, we're able to use the Cranfield Trust to support us. So there's some short-term support, and then this longer-term piece of strengthening leadership within our county. And lastly, once the 12-month programme is up, there's an opportunity for us to fund any of those strategic projects that come out of those mentor relationships, because often through a mentor relationship, that person has the opportunity to really talk to someone, which helps them look at their organisation and look at maybe some strategic development, and then we can start supporting that after the 12-month period. So that's very, very exciting that we can continue supporting the sustainability of that organisation. On top of that, we will look at next steps. So this program is looking to launch in January. Everybody will be invited to that launch. We're looking at around the 19th of January. So in terms of our work this year, we're putting the marketing piece together, and so the partnership can agree that, and that is about us putting a piece around how we discuss it within our organisations and the work that can go out externally. What's been really exciting in all of this is my discussions with sponsors. So I'm delighted to say John Lewis are the first to support this project. And we also, I'm in talks with GWR, who are really impressed with this mentor program. And it's something, having discussed it with them, it's not something they've seen before or supported before. So we've got some great businesses and organisations that are getting very excited about this partnership. So there's others in the pipeline, but essentially what we need to do is continue engaging with businesses and community to help us fund this for the next 5 years. So I guess that brings me on lastly to some corporate social responsibility. This is the bit that has increased for us. So the organisations contacting me, whether they're accountants or solicitors within our county, businesses are really thinking about how they can give MAT back in ways other than money. So we are definitely getting some offers of money, but on the side of, we would love to support you with some money, but we'd love to support with some pro bono work. And that's an area which gets very interesting, because if we've got 10 charity leaders, there's an opportunity in there with the partners, with the sponsorship that comes in to support this program, that maybe there's some pro bono work we can match up with those charity leaders, which will save them an awful lot of money if it comes down to accountancy or solicitors' costs. So this is where this fundamental piece around collaboration and partnerships is so crucial. And I just want to thank you all for joining us on this journey. And we really look forward to, once we launch this in January, we will be impact reporting along the way for you. Just to end on a current note, we've gone this week, we've launched our Surviving Winter campaign. Our Surviving Winter campaign is seasonal, it's across the network. We talked about it last year, but now this year it's Surviving a COVID Winter. And I think this is where we have even more challenges over this winter period for those most vulnerable to choosing between eating or heating. So I was with Dom Cotter last night on Gloss Radio, and he very kindly launched it publicly for us. So I'll be sending some links. It's on our page on our website. We would be hugely grateful if anybody has been given a winter fuel allowance that feels they don't need it and would like to pass it on. Please do support us in this Surviving Winter campaign. Essentially, just a few stats, Gloucestershire has some very high excess winter deaths, and this is about the older people in our community who die because they're not able to heat their homes and they've chosen to eat rather than heat their homes. So it is quite desperate, but we'll be promoting and talking and discussing this over the next few months. So we'd be hugely grateful if you'd like to have a look at the information on that. And that's everything from me. So we welcome Jamie and I. Any questions?
Talitha, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, you and Jamie. That's really stimulating and terrifically encouraging, isn't it? I mean, there are some really, really positive aspects in that. Not least our partnership, which is something that we're very keen on, that partnership is the way to move forward. And we seem to have really struck a chord, the two organisations in this mentoring, and thanks to, as you said, to Helen in kicking that off. One of the things I found encouraging too in what you said was the desire of charities to start to work together, having really faced the abyss, as it were. They're now thinking, well, maybe we can save costs, be more effective, realise our objectives are pretty similar. Because it's been my sense, and I'm sure it's not unique to Gloucestershire, that across the sector there are often, for very good and often very personal reasons, charities with similar objectives trying to do the same sort of thing in the same sort of area who would be much more effective if they worked together. Your sense is that finally, as it were, there's been a realization that that can happen.
Absolutely. It does feel more now than ever that charities are starting to reach out to others. You know, in our conversations where we pointed out, oh, there's somebody else over there nearby working and doing something similar to you, why don't you talk to them? And, you know, there hasn't necessarily been the appetite to reach out, and now there is. And I think we've really got to support that. And if we can do that through our mentoring program and the wider piece around supporting connectivity and networking, I think that's going to be crucial.
Yeah. And similarly, I think your comments towards the end about corporate social responsibility, and I mean, one can be cynical about it for the very big companies. They've got to do it, really, haven't they? If they don't, their major shareholders are going to ask them why they're not. And if a pension fund is a major shareholder, it's going to say to somebody like John Lewis or GWR, what are you doing? Tell us in your annual report what you're doing. But you seem to be finding it in perhaps organisations which are much smaller and not necessarily answerable to shareholders, but are partnerships that also feel they should do their bit through CSR.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I think philanthropy is one of those words, and I've discussed it before, that people are slightly embarrassed about using in this country. In America, if you've done well in business, your natural step is to become a philanthropist and be very open about giving back to your community. If you've done well, then your duty is to give back. And I think that's the bit we need to encourage. And sometimes, you know, organisations and businesses don't quite know how to give back, or don't know if there are ways of giving back other than money, and it's not just about money. So I think this is about us really inspiring our county, and now there is that real appetite around community engagement through COVID, to encourage anybody who would like to get involved, either to support with money and have areas that they can donate to. And there's so many brilliant charities in our county, but in terms of working with GCF and supporting some of these programs like the mentoring program, builds, you know, enormous strength in our county and cross-sector working. And what I'd like to see is more cross-sector working. I think all the meetings I was getting invited to in the first part of me joining GCF, there was no business people at those meetings. It was all third sector and public sector. So we must work cross-sector. We must cross-sector work much more. So I think if we can encourage businesses, whatever size, to get involved, it's a brilliant thing to do. And there is so much businesses can get involved with their community, and we can help with that.
And I think that's something that the Honourable Company may well be able to help with, because we are almost by definition well connected across the county, often with smaller businesses, and therefore introducing the concept and then the wherewithal to exercise that desire to help. I think that may have been missing in the past. I mean, I've wanted to help in some pro bono work, but I've not actually been quite sure how to activate that. If we, working in partnership with you and others, can activate that good thought, then so much the better. I was also struck, I have to say, when you identified from your survey, with my background, I love research, I love data, mental health and isolation being two of the major issues. And then when you came to talk about the individual charities and what their chief executives or chiefs heads were thinking, they were talking about mental health and isolation too, weren't they? As if they were a microcosm of the Gloucestershire society.
I just, when I came into the role, I was hearing a lot about isolation and loneliness. And I think that's the challenge of both. I mean, and I started hearing it very much amongst rural communities, but actually then it was pointed out to me, people in towns can feel just as isolated and lonely. So it felt like the modern epidemic, loneliness and isolation. And, you know, I think there's a huge piece of work to do around how can we connect better, but actually COVID came along and has given us the opportunity to think about that more, given us that opportunity to give us the impetus, to give us the drive to think about how we can connect better, and how we then support charities. So you know, we're looking at across the county where we're grant making, and maybe we're not supporting enough of the rural communities that reach right out to Morton in the Marsh. So some of our grant making is quite concentrated in areas, and they're quite obvious areas, but there's obviously need right across the county. There's deprivation right through the county, and people think maybe the Cotswolds is a wealthy area, but within every area of the Cotswolds is real deprivation. So these are like the hidden needs, if you like. And it just feels then through a crisis, those elements of isolation and loneliness, some have got better, and some of those areas have become better connected, and some have become more isolated or lonely. So this is definitely an overarching theme, an area that we need to address.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you also, I've got a question here from Andrew Tabor. Can you say something about the need for trustees in particular? You mentioned it, but can you expand on what you said about the need in particular for smaller community and community organisations and charities, the need for trustees? Again, something I think the Honourable Company might be able to help with if we can work with you in identifying where the need is.
So the piece of research was about the people who had answered the survey, ran or worked in charities, and their feedback was about their trustees now are more open to new ways of working. So it was about engaging boards and bringing them on a journey of, I guess, an example. So one organisation spoke to me within the first week of COVID, 16th or 17th of March. They said we had a 12 to sort of 3-year plan about how we go digital, how we take our offer online. And within 24 hours, that organisation had turned their business model onto online within 24 hours. And their board were more engaged and more up for change because there was this crisis. So I think through a crisis, maybe some of the things that would take quite a long time to influence, we've all realised now's the time to maybe think about things differently. So I think that's the bit around board development and organisational development. And then there is a piece around trustees. So I know a number of organisations across the county are looking for trustees. And it's really hard to attract trustees. You know, it's really challenging. You know, it's a voluntary role and it takes time. And so finding trustees is challenging. So I think anything where we could support people to come forward as trustees and maybe push them forward to organisations that are looking for trustees, I think that could also be an interesting piece of work.
I think that would be good, and again something we may be able to help with. And I think if you could help us identify the charities and the small community organisations that need trustees, there the attraction may be to somebody to become a trustee because of the nature of the organisation that they would be helping. Got another specific question here. I'm running out of time. We could do this all evening, couldn't we? But we mustn't. Somebody says the charity I'm mentioning is having a problem negotiating an affordable rent on a property, even though there are joint benefits with the landlord. I'm suggesting making a case direct to the trustees of the landlord, who is a charity rich and based in London. I mean, is this a problem charities are finding, that they can't afford to have a base? They can't get the landlord to give them an affordable rent. Did this come up in your survey?
It hasn't specifically, but I think as business, probably if you listen to the LEP and what their feedback is on business, I think negotiating rents with landlords is an issue anyway at the moment. So I think that would probably be for anyone with offices or office space, whether they're reducing offices because they haven't got the people necessarily to fill them, or they're needing to get out of an agreement because everybody's working from home. I think this is definitely a challenge, and definitely where charities might not have the resource to get that level of or pay for somebody to support them in those negotiations. So again, pro bono work would probably be an answer with some of these challenges to our charities. So yes, definitely something to pick up on.
Yeah. We're running up against our allotted time, and I wanted to bring Jamie back in at the end to say, I mean, we've heard about the current collaboration between ourselves. Help us to think through how we can work even harder for Gloucestershire. We heard that there are some particular problems for the county, say in the tourism industry, because and event management, which is giving Gloucestershire a bottom line place in terms of COVID impact. Where do you see the opportunities there for GCS and the Honourable Company to help?
I think the really important thing, and what Talitha has brought to the table more than anything else, is the ability to publicise and ask questions in public and get the information that way. Before, it was largely done by guesswork. Now we can go out to the public and she can go on radio and say, please tell me, and she'll get responses. As far as working with the Honourable Company, I've got two things to say. It won't take a moment. The first is that we are very stretched with our tiny staff at GCF, and so I'm not keen on having more formal alliances at the moment other than what we have. But I think there's plenty of room for informal alliances and discussions. For instance, I discuss matters with Andrew very regularly, he being my cousin and good friend, and I discuss with Helen and people like that as well. And I think some quite informal collaboration it can be of immense value. And I just want to say one last thing before we finalise. And this, I hope, will give members a really warm feeling. I visited a little tiny charity right in the middle of the county, about 18 months ago now, where the CEO was a girl who had not even paid herself for a year, and she had no other means of employment. But they were doing a tiny amount of really valuable work, taking kids who'd been sacked from school and then sacked from special school and then sacked from having special advisors. So they were absolutely at the bottom. And they picked up 2 or 3 of these kids at a time, and with a drill instructor type soldier and an ex-sergeant, they were taught how to behave and how to look after themselves. And this little charity was doing great work, but they were absolutely bereft of management and ideas of how to look after themselves. And she said to me, what can we do? And she became one of the first people to have the pilot mentors. And it completely transformed the charity and her way of thinking. Mm. And it's not always the size. So there are at least, say, 20 kids now who've benefited, who are right at the bottom of the pile, who have now benefited incredibly from that one piece of work. And so the Honourable Company can take great pride in that. And I've got no doubt at all that if this comes off, as I think it will, Cranfield Trust are very professional, as Helen will tell you. This piece of work is going to be really quite impressive.
Well, Jamie, that's very encouraging. I mean, there's lots to take away from what you and Talitha have talked about, and hopefully, as you say, that the collaboration will produce great results, which will be of value, one has to say, not just for Gloucestershire, but more widely, and through your association of community foundations, no doubt there will be others watching what Gloucestershire does in this context. It's a more holistic approach to supporting charity than just giving them money, a point you made early on, and I think that's entirely valid. I think it's also important that because we share the For Gloucestershire premise, as it were, for our work, that we continue to talk together. I also think it's important, as you had in your title, that we continue to work for all the communities in Gloucestershire, not just the most obvious ones or the ones that shout the loudest or the ones we happen to have heard of. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, isn't it? To find those kernels of activity that you've just been referring to, that sometimes you only come across serendipitously, but we must have a better way of finding where the real need is in communities where perhaps we haven't been as active or as knowledgeable as we might have been in the past. Jamie, Talitha, it's been great. Thank you. That's been an outstanding contribution to our AGM day. It's given us lots of food for thought. It resonates with some of the themes that I mentioned and that we hold dear within the company. So thank you again. And thank you for the people who put in questions. Thank you for the members for attending. We look forward to seeing us all again. And one of the benefits of coming out of COVID is that we'll be able to have the sort of informal chats that you were just referring to around coffee or whatever, and build some great ideas. Jamie, Talitha, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Phil for brokering the technology. I look forward to meeting everybody again in person, vaccinated before too long. Thanks very much, everybody, and good evening.